from Deuteronomy 31, 6 through 8. Be strong and bold. Have no fear or dread of them, because it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not fail you or forsake you. Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the sight of all Israel, Be strong and bold, for you are the one who will go with this people into the land of the Lord has sworn to their ancestors to give them. And you will put them in possession of it. It is the Lord who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not fail you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed.
Do not fear or be dismayed. Easier said than done, huh? We're coming upon the end of our stewardship emphasis from bread and wine to faith and giving. And one of the consistent themes that has been happening throughout these weeks is that message. Don't be afraid. Trust God. When we looked into the Old Testament, we saw the people who were wandering in the wilderness. Things weren't working out for them so well in Egypt. And so there was an objective. Moses came to free the Israelites from captivity in Egypt. But he brought them out into this wilderness. And you've got to remember that in the Jewish tradition, in the mindset of Middle Eastern people, the wilderness is a scary place. There are scary things out there. And so the objective was to get out of the wilderness and get into this land that was promised to them. And so that was what Moses was trying to help the folks do. He was trying to help them understand what it means to trust God so that they could get into the promised land. Now, as we said before, when they were working their way towards the promised land, were there focus groups and committees and goals and objectives and plans and things like that? No, there wasn't. There was just this mandate to trust God. Trust God to provide. Trust God to lead. And so that's what happened. And the key passage there is what Rich read. It was right when they were on the edge of the promised land. Don't be afraid. Be strong. Do not fear. Trust God. And that is when this paradigm shift happened. And all of a sudden, the wilderness wasn't a place to fear anymore. The wilderness was a place where you can connect to God. Okay, so let's jump ahead to the time of Jesus and Jesus' ministry. When Jesus began his public ministry, what was the first thing that happened? When we read about the life of Jesus and his public ministry, what had to happen first?
He was baptized.
He was baptized. Where was he baptized? In the River Jordan, out in the middle of nowhere. Okay? He was out in the wilderness, and he was baptized by John, who was somebody who gained all sorts of comfort and was able to connect with God out in the wilderness. He got it. He got this, God will provide. And God did provide, because what was John the Baptist's diet? Honey and wild locust.
Locust and wild honey.
Honey and wild locust.
I'm
The
full.
locust. You ever seen locusts? They got teeth. Okay, wild honey and wild locust. All right. What was the next thing? After Jesus was baptized, then what happened?
40 days in trial.
And where did the 40-day temptation? He was out in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights, again, to prepare himself, to be prepared to go out and do his mission. And remember, his mission, his objective was to preach good news to the poor, to set captives free, recovery of sight to the blind, the delivery of good news. And so in order to do this, he spent time out in the wilderness, which ended in him being tempted in the wilderness. And the temptation was, do things that will help you, to serve you, to make you comfortable. And Jesus said no to that temptation. Then we can go into the disciples. The disciples had an objective too. Jesus said, hey, come with me and I will make you fishers of people. And so he took the disciples. There was no business plan. Jesus didn't come along with a pamphlet and say, now I have this plan for you. This is what's going to happen, and these are the goals and the objectives, and we're going to have focus group meetings every now and then, and this is how we're going to do it. No, he said, just drop everything right now, come with me, and I will make you fishers of people. And where did they go? When they got weary and tired from healing the sick and proclaiming the good news and doing all this stuff, where did they go? Out in the wilderness to get renewed. And the most famous one is on the Mount of Transfiguration, where they had this wonderful mountaintop experience which allowed them to go back down where there is need, where people are in need. All right, well, let's talk about the church. So after Jesus had died and was crucified, he rose again, and he came to his disciples and said, all authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. And he gave them the objective. Therefore, go into all the world and teach and preach and baptize. That was the objective. He didn't give them a roadmap of how to do it. In fact, the only thing he said is, I want you to go to Jerusalem and wait. How much do we like to wait? Especially when somebody doesn't give us a time frame. He didn't say, I want you to go to Jerusalem and wait, and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on such and such a date, these 4 things will happen, and then from that point on, you'll carry out this plan that's a 6-step plan for whatever. He didn't say that. He said, go into all the world. That was the objective. There was no plan. Just wait in Jerusalem. And after that wait in Jerusalem, the Holy Spirit came down on those folks and equipped them to go and do that which Jesus had called them to do. And the church grew organically. It's not like they went out there, and it's not like Jesus said, okay, John, you're going to go down to India, and Paul, or Peter, you're going to go over here and stay in Jerusalem, but he didn't send them out with specific places and specific plans. And the churches that grew weren't all little cookie cutter churches that all looked the same and did things the same. The churches grew organically. Now, let's jump way ahead in the future, okay? We're just going to set aside almost 1,800 years of church history and come right here onto the American frontier with Barton Stone, Thomas and Alexander Campbell, Walter Scott, and all these guys who were the founders of our movement, who are the founders of the disciples. They realized that things were not working. They were in a different place. They were used to being Scottish Presbyterians. And when the Presbyterian Church and the Methodist Church and all these churches went out to the American frontier, they were trying to do things the same way that they did them in Europe. And you know what? Wasn't working out. Wasn't working out at all. And Thomas and Alexander Campbell and Barton Stone recognized that things weren't working out. They recognized that this new frontier was a mission field. Even though there were people who might have claimed a church background or something like that, they realized that those folks just were not connecting with the church anymore. They also realized that there were a lot of folks there on the American frontier who had never heard the good news at all and needed very desperately to hear good news of hope. So when they got together, do you think that they came up with an agenda and had focus groups and came up with a game plan of what they were going to do?
No.
Cane Ridge Revival in Cane Ridge, Kentucky, where Barton Stone went to this revival. That Cane Ridge Revival, the Holy Spirit came down on that place and did amazing things. And it was the launching point for a movement. Not just a denomination, not just a group of people who could call themselves something different than all the rest of the denominations. In fact, all they wanted to do was call themselves Christian. Because they says, we aren't the only Christians, we're Christians only. And so they didn't have any game plan, they were led by the Spirit to start this movement that the reason why we're here today is because of that movement. The birth of a new, inclusive, Spirit-filled movement that spoke to a new generation of folks who were hungry for the good news. They recognized there was a problem. They recognized there was a new generation of people who had to hear the good news in a different way, and they responded to the Spirit's call to do it. In all these cases that I have mentioned this morning, the issue is trust in God. Lean not on your own understanding, but trust God. Be strong. Be courageous. Now, let's jump ahead a couple hundred years, right here in Chico, California. Postmodern America, there is a need for good news because the old way of church and doing church is not working. It's like we have a whole new frontier ahead of us. So it is not working. We recognize that it is not working, at least for most. For a few it is, but for most it's not. So this is where I come in and tell you what has been going on for the past 8 years. See, I'm not just going to talk about what the discernment committee has done in the last 6-7 months. I'm not going to talk about, what we've been doing since we've had these potlucks for the last, oh my word, almost a year and a half, 2 years. I'm not going to tell you, I'm going to go back to before I even came here when the New Beginnings report showed us some things about our church. Watch this. This is pretty good. No hands, no remote control. I'm going to telepathically make that slide change.
Wow.
Pretty good, huh? You've all seen, I'm not going to go into detail of what this is. I'm just going to show you some things that may look familiar for you. We went through all sorts of charts, this organizational maturation curve that tells you the directions a church could go. You could either die real quickly, or you can do a couple of things different and die out slowly, or you can do something different and launch into something new. We've looked at other things like what is it that a church has? A church has time, energy, and money. However you divide that time and energy of money is a way that a church can go in a particular direction. We talked about how basically there's only 3 directions a church can go, especially in postmodern times when the church is on the decline all across the board. You can either do nothing and keep going the way you've always been going, and eventually you'll run out of resources and die. Or you can say, you know what, we don't want our resources to go to waste. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our energy and we're going to use our money to kind of buy a little time so that we can figure out a way to use those resources for some other ministry, to help another ministry. Or we can say we're going to use our time and our money to go after energy. In other words, go after where the mission field is. Those are the three things. And we talked about the difference between a 57 Chevy church and a Prius church. And right now, all of this stuff maybe you have seen before. If you haven't, these are just some of the things that we've gone. We talked about the Ohana principle. Nobody gets left behind. Nobody gets marginalized. We've talked about why does it have to be either or? Why can't it be both and? And so the discernment team has taken all of these things into consideration, all of the data that we have gathered from surveys and feedback that we have got from potlucks, and we have come up with a plan. I want you to think of what we're going to do from now on. I want you to think in terms of two things, the churched and the unchurched. So in your left column there, you see the churched. And within the churched, you've got all sorts of different people. You got little folks there singing and things. And then you've also got the unchurched over there, people who are not a part of a church fellowship. In the category of the churched, we have people who are comfortable with traditional forms of church. These are people who and when I say traditional forms of church, I'm talking anywhere from Episcopalian to, what's the Dome Church out there? The Neighborhood church. Because there's a certain way in which church is done. There's an order, there are songs that are sung, there are similarities that are a traditional church model. Some people are in existing faith communities. See how we've got, and it's just like Baskin Robbins. When we talk about the neighborhood church and the Episcopalian church and things like that, even though it all falls under the category of traditional form of church, there's different flavors to that. And so you can see how people have kind of clustered into little communities of faith. The guy up there between the yellow and the green one, he's a church hopper. He's the one who can't make up his mind, so he goes over here and he goes over there. There's people like that. We know that. But you notice there are some people in between, too. There are some other folks in the category who are comfortable with traditional forms of church, but they just don't have any place to go right now. So I think you're going to have to click this one a couple of times. There we go. See, those people have turned green now? Those people in between the cracks are people who are seeking a more traditional faith community. Okay? So that's the church. Let's talk about the unchurched now. The unchurched. Among the unchurched, we have people who like Jesus, but they don't necessarily like the church. Sometimes we call them spirituals but not religious. Or if we really want to be smart, we say they're SB&Rs, spiritual but not religious. They like Jesus, but they don't necessarily like the church. Yes, we already talked about spiritual, not religious. And then there are people who don't like church at all for any number of reasons. Maybe it's because they've been de-churched. And when I say de-churched, I mean, back in the South, it's actually called being churched. If you get kicked out of a church in the South, they say, oops, Rosie's been churched. So that's what that means. The de-churched are people who have been alienated from the church for whatever reason. We have the misinformed, people who may have some notions about the church that they have understood from don't watch movies and think that that's the way church is. Don't watch the news and think that's the way church is, because maybe they've been misinformed about what church is and could be. Or maybe they're just oblivious to spiritual matters altogether. That is this mission field right here that's called the unchurched. So, our proposal is, this is going to take a couple of ones. Here's First Christian Church. First Christian Church, Chico, California. And we have our little folks there. What we want to do is we want to take a group of leaders from this church and go out into this mission field of the unchurched. Now here's the deal. As we are right now, we are not equipped to reach these people over in the unchurched categories, because a lot of them have such preconceived notions of the church. Maybe they've been damaged by the church. Something has happened to where there is no way that they're going to walk into this building. Even if you build a solid relationship with them and can get them to maybe even consider walking through the doors, they are not going to stay for whatever reason. We are not, as we are right now, equipped to deal with that mission field. So the proposal is to have a ministry that is tentatively right now being called Spirit Connections, to help connect with those people who are in the unchurched category. Not using any kind of traditional church forms at all, but doing what the gospel in the early church and the people of Israel have always done, and the people in the early Stone Campbell movement, and that means going out and growing a spirit community, a community of faith organically. Here's the goal. Oh, go back one, Connor. Now you know how I did this. The little green people up there under the church, the church, the people who are accustomed and comfortable with traditional church forms, don't get off the hook. They don't get to do just nothing. They don't just get to sit back in the pews and say, yep, I'm just going to sit here and enjoy church the way it's always been done. There's going to be a challenge there, because remember, there are folks who fall in between the cracks who are comfortable with traditional church forms. And we have the opportunity and can go out and reach those folks, because we are equipped to do that. There's nothing wrong with saying, you know what? We are unashamedly and unabashedly a traditional church. And if you like traditional church, boy, have we got a place for you. Because this is who we are. These are our core values. So we don't get off the hook. There's still missionary work that we have to do, but just in a different field. Now, the goal is to create a thriving spirit community. People want something to vote on. People are like, well, we can't wait till the discernment team gives us the report because we're going to vote on it. Okay, but let me tell you what you're voting on, all right? We are presenting a direction, not a program. There is not going to be, currently, right now, there is not a game plan with goals and objectives and milestones and things like that. Right now, we are simply wanting to offer the opportunity for some leaders in our church to go into all the world, as the Great Commission tells us to do. We are inviting all to the table, not to a specific congregation. It's not like we are making a new congregation, nor is it we are wanting people to come here and be a part of this congregation at 8:30 or 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings in this place. We are wanting to simply create a thriving spirit community, of which we're not sure what's going to happen with that, because again, it's going to grow organically. Just like the churches in the early church movement, after the Holy Spirit came on the disciples and they went into the world, each of those churches, each of those faith communities are going to look different because they grow organically. Those who we reach out to will change us. The people who prefer traditional church forms will be cared for. They will not be left behind. This isn't all right, we're going to send all the cool kids out to go make a real church and everybody else can just kind of sit and, do what they've always done before and we'll just let them die out slowly. That is not the case at all. We will care for the people in this church. But doing nothing is not an option. Doing nothing is not an option. They will be challenged to learn a new language. And I'm not talking Greek or Spanish or Hebrew or anything like that. I'm talking about a new language where we learn to communicate with each other and others who we are reaching out to who prefer traditional church forms. What we need from you all, if this is what we're voting on, we need commitment to a both-and ministry. This isn't an either-or, this is a both-and. We need time, we need talent, we need resources, and more than anything else, we need prayer for this to work. We need people to either be a goer or a sender. That means you're either going to go out there and be actively involved and engaged with this new mission field, or you're going to enable somebody to send. You're going to enable to send somebody out into that mission field. And I'm not just talking the spirit connection either. I'm talking about people who might fall in between the cracks, who are comfortable with traditional forms. And as this is kind of our little motto, Blaine Roberts came up with this one: get comfortable feeling uncomfortable, because it's going to be uncomfortable. But remember, the folks in the wilderness, the children of Israel in the wilderness were uncomfortable because they didn't know what was going to happen next. The disciples were a little uncomfortable because they didn't know what was happening next. Can you imagine what the people on the American frontier, as the disciples started growing, there was some fear there too. There was some uncomfort there too. But remember, the core message that our scripture gave us this morning is do not fear. Do not fear. Be strong. Be courageous. That is the game plan. That is the work of the discernment committee team and what they have been doing. This is supposed to be our business meeting day where we come up with, we're supposed to have a slate of officers and we're supposed to vote up or down on this plan. The problem is as we looked at the Constitution and bylaws, number one, it took a long time for the nominating committee to get together and get the answers that they needed from folks who were to serve in the leadership roles. We're supposed to, we had misinterpreted something in our Constitution and bylaws. It looked like all we needed to do was publish 2 weeks ahead of time that we're actually going to have a business meeting. But what it ended up being is we had to give you a list of who are going to be our leaders and a plan before it was voted on. So this is something that's going to be done at a future date. This has just been presented to you now. I'm not going to open it up for Q&A right now because that's what the soup potluck after the second service is all about. That is where we're going to have our Q&A if you have any questions about it. But I just wanted to present to you today something that is not new, because this has been going on. This has been something that has been a part of God's people since the very beginning. And the message is, we don't have to have a laid out game plan with goals and objectives. And no, we do have an objective. The objective is to reach out to people in the community who need to hear good news. It's just that we're going to have to find a different way to do it. Different can be scary, but when we get scared, when we are reluctant to do something, when we don't know all of the details, and we get nervous about that, God's message to us is be strong, be courageous, do not fear. Would you pray with me?